Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Himes, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today. I have a few questions, but I just want to take a minute maybe to restore a little bit of order to this, or balance to this discussion that has emerged on our debt. Mr. Secretary, like you, I believe that a concern with our debt is prudent, and I think I say that with some credibility, having supported measures that balance our long-term debt scenario, some of which were unpopular. However, when that concern becomes ideology, blind to all facts and economic advice and reality, it is something different than prudence. And the 5 years I've been here, I have heard over and over and over again that the question is not when we have a disaster associated with our debt, but not if, but when. That just around the corner is a debt-induced disaster. That the Federal Reserve's expansionary monetary policy, inflation is just around the corner. And of course, the hallmark of every single one of those multiple predictions in the last 5 years is that they have been absolutely wrong. Of course, in those 5 years, a consensus has developed in the economic community broadly shared that in fact the contractionary fiscal policies of this Congress, the austerity, have meaningfully contributed to a reduction in growth and to the loss of otherwise creatable jobs in this economy. Mr. Secretary, you might be interested to know that when Chairman Bernanke was sitting just where you're sitting, I asked him, conscious as I am of the importance of long-term stability in our debt, whether he could point to any industrialized country which had better managed the tensions in the last 5 years between the need to reduce long-term debt and the need to assist in economic recovery. Sometimes there are significant tension in those two needs. The chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, could not name a country which had better managed those tensions. And I know you've been a part of that effort, and I thank you for your work in that regard. Mr. Secretary, my question is about the Volcker rule. Like you, I was pleased to see that the regulators finally came out with a rule. I agree with you. I think that it is strong and comprehensive. I am, however, concerned by the explicit exemption for proprietary trading with respect to sovereign bonds. Frankly, also the exemption for muni bonds. The headline, "Bank brought low by investments in Greek debt," I think is probably not just an idea, and certainly it's a possibility in the future. So I wonder if you could address the ability under the Volcker rule of the banks to invest in securities which could be very, very risky and quite volatile over time.
Congressman, obviously our initial core concern was the treatment of U.S. Treasuries, and issues arose particularly with regard to the impact that the rule would have on banks with relationships with other foreign nationals and their sovereign debt. I believe that the way the provisions were worked out provides guidelines, a path for sovereign debts bonds to be treated appropriately. I think if you look at the structure of the rule, it's clear that there is accountability at the level of the CEO to come up with a plan for implementing these rules in a way that's consistent with the statute and the risks that are being undertaken. So I don't think all of the detail is necessarily reflected in the black letter law of the rule. There's going to be questions of interpretation. It was deliberately left to be worked out by the regulators and the firms to reach a balance so that we don't shut down a very important sovereign market, including the market for U.S. Treasuries. So it's something we'll continue to work on with this committee and with the regulators. If I could just say a word
I have one other question. Yeah. I appreciate that answer. Having worked in that industry for a long period of time, I know they will gravitate towards exemptions, and both munis and sovereign bonds present the possibility of very real risk. So I hope that you and the regulators will continue to watch that closely. One other question before I run out of time, Mr. Secretary, pertains to a statement in your written testimony, Dodd-Frank, many of the regulatory changes being largely completed in now. I wonder if, I'm heartened to hear that, but I wonder if in my 30 or so seconds remaining, you could talk a little bit about how you're feeling about systemic risk and in particular the problem of too big to fail. To make the question very simple, has Title II succeeded, in fact, in reducing the likelihood that we see a major dislocation or problem in one of our major banks?
I'm not sure I can do that in 5 seconds, Mr. Chairman. Do I have the...
You have 3.
I think
We'll give you about 20 or 30.
Yeah, we've made enormous progress since 2009. We are much safer and sounder, and made some very detailed remarks on this last week. I'd be happy to give a more detailed response when I have the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Time of the